conference people and journalists and thinkers about how to make the world better. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. All right. All right, so the economy is about a lot of intersections, not just technology in the economy, but for each of us as humans, our backgrounds and our lives. Tom Malone and I have a number of intersections. We actually met at a Techonomy dinner. He runs the Center for Collective Intelligence at MIT. I actually used to work as a nonprofit called Collective Intelligence. He wrote a book called The Future of Work. I'm the chair for the Future of Work with Singularity University. And he wrote a book called Superminds. Well, unfortunately, that's where it breaks down. I'm not a supermind. But he is. Please welcome Tom Malone. So I think of your idea of Superminds as almost like a pair of augmented reality glasses. Once you put them on, it's kind of a lens on the world, and you can't unsee what you thought you saw. So help us to take the red pill and tell people what this mentality is.
So the way to see through these glasses is to first think about what a supermind is. And I define a supermind, I think of a supermind as a kind of ghost. Superminds are powerful entities that are all around us all the time, but that are mostly invisible unless you know how to look. I define a supermind as a group of individuals acting collectively in ways that seem intelligent. Now, by that definition, superminds really are all around us. Companies, governments, families, labor markets, scientific communities. Actually, I think the learning community across those 5 cities that Esther just described is an example of a supermind. And in fact, maybe all the people in this room could be a supermind. All those are examples of groups of people acting together in ways that at least sometimes seem intelligent. And if you think about it, almost everything we humans have ever achieved was not done by single individuals acting all alone. It was done by these superminds.
And what made you fascinated about this? How did you sort of come to be focused on this and to develop this perspective?
Well, in a way, it came from the book Future of Work. When I had published that and was thinking about what to do next, I thought about sort of following the ideas that were in that book into practice. But what I realized I wanted to do was to think about what was really coming next. How could we see around the corner?
So you did research, and you had this belief that there's the way that we actually act, at least in some cases, collectively intelligent. How do you think of the different sort of categories, and what are the different ways in which we do that?
So one of the most important things about putting on the supermind glasses is to understand what some of the different types of superminds are. And in my book, I identify 5 basic types of superminds for making decisions. The first and most obvious is hierarchies. In a hierarchy, the group decisions are made by delegating them to individuals in the group. Another very important kind of supermind are democracies, where the group decisions are made by voting. A third and very important kind of supermind are markets, where the group decisions are really the combination of all the pairwise agreements between individual buyers and sellers. And a fourth kind of supermind are communities, where the group decisions are made by a kind of informal consensus based on shared norms and reputations. So that's 4. Those 4 kinds of superminds all depend on some amount of cooperation among the people in the group. Okay. But if you don't have any cooperation in the group members, then you have the 5th kind of supermind, which I call ecosystems. In an ecosystem, the group decisions are made by the law of the jungle. Whoever has the most power gets what they want, and the survival of the fittest. Now, those 5 types I don't think account for everything we see, but I think they do account for a very large number of the things we see all around us all the time.
So Esther was just talking about the kinds of groups, the towns that she works with. So are those communities, are those ecosystems, are they both?
The groups she talked about, I think, would be most easily viewed as a community.
Okay.
There may be other aspects of some of the other types as well, but I think it's mostly a community, or actually in that case, a community of communities.
Right. And then what about, I mean, the way that we tend to channel human energy and build value, we tend to call the organization. So what is that? Where does that fit?
So most companies actually have several superminds as part of them. Okay. Every formal company has a hierarchy, and so that hierarchy is a supermind. But every company also includes a bunch of people in the company. Those people also form a kind of community, or actually many kinds of overlapping communities usually. Those communities make their decisions based on shared norms and what people think of each other and reputations. So sometimes the hierarchy wants one thing, and the community of the employees wants something else. So there's a kind of ecosystem where those two superminds compete with each other. And in spite of what some hierarchical managers might think, the hierarchy doesn't always win. Right. Sometimes the community, another word for that, by the way, is the culture. Sometimes the culture, in fact, often the culture wins over the hierarchy.
So sometimes this is called a shadow hierarchy, or it's actually the norms within the organization that defines what success and behavior is like.
Exactly.
All right. So every time anybody develops this type of typology or ontology, it begs a very important question: why? Like, what's it good for? What is this? How would I use this understanding of the different ways that we work collectively to hopefully be intelligent?
Great question. There are a lot of ways you could use this to design new software tools, etc. But for today, I think one of the most important ways we can use this is to help answer the questions that David was talking about in the first session. How can we reset and restore? How can we find new ways of governing these things? Maybe even how can we fix democracy? To even think about those questions, you have to be able to think about them constructively. You have to be able to do more than just throw up your hands and say, oh my goodness, everything's terrible, what can we do? You have to have some kind of conceptual tools for thinking. And I think the 5 types of superminds I just listed and a number of the other concepts in the book Superminds, I think those give us a set of conceptual tools, a kind of language, an engineering toolkit, if you want to think of it that way, for thinking creatively about how to deal with all these problems. In fact, I think one of the most important messages I would have for this audience today is that we shouldn't just throw up our hands. We should think about this like designers, like the kind of innovators many of the people in this room are and many of the people in this room admire. I think we can apply that same kind of creative, innovative, design-oriented thinking to the problems of how to structure the superminds, the groups of people that are using and governing and being influenced by the technologies that all of us in this room are interested in.
Now I'm definitely an optimist, and I buy all the sort of the positive structure for this, but the truth is, as I think we've explored on the economy stage a number of times, is we look at a lot of the sort of scaled platforms that we've developed, and there's a bunch of potential negative consequences. So we get some of the largest supermind platforms in the world, so the Facebook, Google, YouTube, and sure, there's a lot of collective intelligence being exhibited, but there's a lot of collective stupidity. And there seem to be a lot of potential negative consequences that just almost make it tremendously manipulable platforms. So there's Supermind for good that you're talking about, but here's also Supermind for knocking society off its rails.
Yeah.
So how do you think about, is that like inevitable for these scaled platforms? Are they just infinitely manipulable?
So I think superminds are kind of like individual people. Okay. Some of them are really smart, some are pretty stupid. Sometimes you really like what they do. Sometimes superminds can be evil. I think most people would say that Nazi Germany was an evil supermind.
Right.
So I don't think there's anything surprising that sometimes these superminds act in ways we don't like.
Right.
What I think we should do, though, is not just say, oh, well, because technology had some bad effects, we should stop using technology or it's all a bad thing. We should look at it more like a designer, more constructively. If you built the first automobile, for instance, and it turned out to be way too noisy, you wouldn't say, oh, well, never mind, I guess automobiles are a bad idea.
Right.
You'd say, what can we do to make the noise less?
Right.
And I think that's the approach we should apply to these problems. And I think the kind of conceptual toolkit I was talking about can help us do that in a much more systematic, creative, constructive way.
So there's a dinner tonight that's focused on climate, and you've got the CoLab. Is that talk a little bit about just how you would use this methodology? Like, what's the way that you try to help people? I mean, there's a ton of smart people in the room. How do you help them to be able to sort of coalesce around trying to actually build some approaches to some of these wicked problems?
So in addition to creating conceptual ways for thinking about these things, we've actually done some actual creating of new kinds of superminds. And the example you're referring to is one we call Climate CoLab. We've been doing this project for about a decade now. And the project really involves crowdsourcing the problem of what to do about global climate change.
Okay.
So we've created an online platform called Climate CoLab and an online community of over 120,000 people from all over the world using this platform. The community includes some of the world's leading experts on climate change. It also includes business people, students, policymakers, lots and lots of other people from all over the world in all walks of life. Together, these people are developing and evaluating proposals for what to do about different parts of the climate change problem, from how to generate electricity with fewer emissions, to how to reduce emissions of carbon in sectors like transportation and buildings, and to how to change public attitudes about climate. So out of all that process, we've had a bunch of pretty interesting ideas that have come. If we have time, I'll tell you one of my favorite examples. Do we have time?
Fire away.
So one of my favorite examples is a device. Many of the proposals are for things companies can do or governments can do or whatever. This is a proposal for a specific device called the sun saluter. It's a rotating solar panel that rotates during the day to follow the sun across the sky.
Right.
By rotating, it's able to generate more electricity than a fixed solar panel. And the thing that powers that rotation is dripping water and gravity. And as the water drips, it's filtered to make 4 liters of clean drinking water per day.
That's great.
So that same low-cost device produces both clean drinking water and electricity, 2 critical needs for millions of people around the world. Now, I think that's a pretty cool idea for a gadget, but what I think is even more interesting is where the idea came from. It didn't come from an expert sitting in a room like this or a professor at Stanford or MIT or someplace like that. It came from a young woman who had the idea when she was only 16 years old and who later dropped out of Princeton to help develop that idea further.
Yeah.
So that shows, I think, that if we're willing to use superminds, if we're not just designing superminds to solve the problems, we can use superminds to come up with those designs. And I think what we've done with Climate CoLab is just a first step in that direction. But it illustrates how we can use these new technologies not just to cause problems, but to create new, much bigger and more involving and more diverse groups to try to come up with solutions to the problems.
Some of the longtime economists know that Bill Gross and Andrew Beebe actually created a company that tried to develop similar technology, but the technology at the time wasn't up for it. So I hope she actually has the solution to that. So I'm going to ask for an audience question in just a second. So please raise your hand so the mic can come to you. But really, just briefly, so I am an optimist, but I also, it's hard not to see all of the downside of a lot of, especially the scaled platforms and how some of these superminds for bad are it's an arms race, and they seem to be winning. So you wave your magic wand. Do you have some supermind approach to how you change the design of those platforms so that actually the forces of good prevail?
I don't think there's a single answer, just like there's no magic wand that will solve everything in the world. I do think that for specific problems, there are specific ideas. One problem a lot of people talk about is fake news. I think there's nothing new about fake news. We've had fake news for as long as we've had news, actually. The technology makes it easier to disseminate that fake news, gives more people the power to do it and to send it to people in particular. So there's some new aspects to the problem now. But the technology also gives us some new tools for helping to deal with it. One of my favorite ideas about that is creating some new kind of organizations that rate the credibility of news items.
Right.
I don't think it works to have the platform owners themselves do that because they've got all kind of financial motives to do something else.
Yeah, so far it doesn't work well.
But if you have some other organization, maybe a nonprofit, a set of them that do this, I think that could work. And it only works, however, if they're respected by kind of a wide range of the population.
Yeah.
If you've got one set of people who the liberals believe and another set of people who the conservatives believe and nobody crosses the path, then you've got a much bigger problem. That may be the problem we have today. Then you've got a problem of not really a single community anymore. You've got a bifurcated community.
Right.
And democracies basically work in the context of a community. If you've got two separate communities, democracies aren't usually a good way for them to solve their problems. That becomes more like an ecosystem where they fight it out.
Right.
In
More
some way.
Darwinian.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so we have a question. Please.
Actually, hi, I'm Charlie Long. I'm a real estate developer and been a city manager of many places. You actually started to answer the question I was posing, which has to do with the fact that we have an unprecedented level of, you call it an ecosystem, I would call it a schizophrenia of community in this country. We've got Texas and California contemplating secession, and there is a almost complete rigidity to the cocooning that's going on, and much of that cocooning, it seems, is the source of a lot of the, quote, abuses that are blamed on technology but are actually the result of people using technology to reflect their points of view. I guess it would be, what you're doing is absolutely fascinating, and it would be really good to just hear what your ideas are for bringing together these very, very rigidly cocooned superminds to try to get them to create a sense of common purpose.
Yeah. So I don't have a single answer, unfortunately. I do think there are a bunch of possibilities that we can think about. One is, maybe we'll all just come to our senses and it'll go away.
Hasn't worked out so far.
Hasn't worked so
who
far,
knows?
right? Another is kind of maybe the other extreme is maybe it will have to be solved by violence in some way. The Civil War was ultimately solved by violence. And I hope it doesn't come to that, but it's not impossible. A somewhat more optimistic view would be that it happens from the ground up, and maybe even these technologies, if they're used in slightly different ways, can promote more real conversations between people in different communities. And when they talk to each other and see they're just humans and et cetera, then maybe some of the animosity will decrease. I grew up in a small town in New Mexico, and when I go back and visit my friends there, I think it's really helpful, actually, to sort of talk human to human. And maybe we can do that in ways that involve technology in new ways. Maybe it will be some other kind of non-violent, but still ecosystem-like power play. Maybe the powerful companies or the powerful parties or something will kind of, one will dominate and the others will still stay instead of seceding. Or maybe they really will divide, So I wish I knew a better answer. Actually, I do have one more constructive thing to say, which is, I think it's possible to build superminds to solve problems like this in new ways, to systematically consider many different alternatives, like the ones I was just spewing off the top of my head, to systematically consider them, evaluate them. I don't think we're going to have a few guys in a room figuring out all the answers and then they just build it and it works. I think this is something where we're going to have to try a lot of different things to see what works, but hopefully to do that in a more systematic, comprehensive, cumulative way. And so I think for several problems, including for sure climate change and maybe even the kind of fragmentation of American society, it might be worth assembling something like the Manhattan Project. But in this case, I think there's one big difference from the Manhattan Project. There, you sent a few dozen experts off into the deserts of New Mexico. Now, I think it should be thousands or millions of people all over the world connected electronically.
Right, and rather than fission aggregation. So I would love to continue superminding, if it can be a verb, but I think actually we're ready for a break. So please thank Tom Malone.